Well, whenever you're ready, Margarita, just shout if you need anything. Paula and I are both here, but we're really looking forward to this session, and I'm sure you'll take us on a fabulous journey today, with some great activities.
Thank you, Vicky. Oh, I'm seeing freezing in Kent. Wonderful. Hello, everybody. I will make an effort to check in. That is actually one of the requests to Paolo and Vicky, who are helping host this. Because of the active nature of this, I won't be able to watch the chat in real time, but I will try and, but if there is anything significant, please do draw my attention to it. So I'll close it off just for now. So hello and welcome. And what I'm introducing to you today is a format from coaching, one of the most popular formats. And what I would like to offer you is a format how it can be used with a group potentially, so that you can get more bung out of the time that you spend. But the invitation is to apply it to your own aspirations, frustrations, etc. So it's a sort of tweaked version of Grow. To introduce it, let me show you a few slides, but I hope to be very quickly through the slides so that we can very quickly be on the practical application, because that's where a lot of the nuances are. So are you seeing my screen? Yeah, great. So I've been running this session online for a little while. So I call it Guided Self-Coaching Workshop. And part of the strength of it is that it's incredibly flexible, which is why here I don't prescribe what it will be applied to. So obviously here you can apply it to any context of your own, in your own teaching practice, in order to get even deeper into what it's like for students and how it might be applied for them. So first of all, thank you very much. Oh, pressed some wrong button here. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. To introduce myself very briefly, I'm a holistic leadership coach. I augment that with a bunch of psychologists, and some of the questions that I might be offering you to help unpick any knotted places might come from those. But further back than that, I was a member of the Active Learning Network when it first was set up at the Sussex University, and contributed to a conference. And 2 of my chapters have been published in Active Learning publications. So I have a long-standing and warm connection with the network. So it's really exciting to be here for me. So I'm actually possibly going to ask you to think about this for yourselves for now. What are you hoping for from this session? So in reading the write-up, in making the time to be here, what in your mind, what were you imagining, what would be useful? Because even if you just know this for yourself just now, we can come back to it towards the end and check whether there's anything that we could add into the pot. So just for the sake of coherence of running this, I normally ask participants to share about this at the start, what their best hopes, perhaps somewhat expectations, but let's perhaps for this just get moving. So often when people are thinking about any project, any aspiration, and equally about a frustration, there tends to mind, getting some ideas for working with students who might be stuck. Fabulous, spot on. When people are feeling stuck, generally, their attention goes to this bit, how. Their estimate, their perception with themselves is that they have an idea of where they want to get to, but they can't see the how, or the how that they've tried hasn't worked out and they can't think of other options. Generally, that is what we see. Now, I will be using this metaphor of the journey, where from, where to, consistently, because we also will be using it in the format. So, and this may apply not just in school, but so often the kids are like, well, I don't, I just need the how to get the relief. And again, when people are stuck, the relief is a lot on their mind. But actually, that's distracting them. When we think of a problem, again, I have the problem, I have the solution. The number of times that I ask people, so if this problem was solved, what would that look like? And actually, that might be the first time when they kind of go, huh. And I say, can you describe it? Let's paint me a picture. And in struggling to do that, that's the first moment. So it's quite useful potentially to do that because it illustrates for people for themselves to kind of go, I totally was convinced that I knew where that would get me. And it's only now you're asking me to describe it. So this is the vision stuff. But people tend to think often that they know this. So item 1, if the only way they can describe the result is by saying what they won't have, I won't be stressed. I will no longer have financial pressures. I won't be scared anymore. Whatever it is, or I won't be so tired after reading one page. Any description by what they won't have is actually a failure to describe. The way I illustrate this is if I was to make a movie and you told me it was not a windy day and it was not a cloudy day, I can't make that movie. You need to tell me what will be in the picture. And that's a serious actual mental effort for people to construct because their attention has been captured here or here in the but how do I make it happen? So here's an illustration from Terry Pratchett. Again, from is if we're trying to escape, from is what we're thinking of. So continuing with this metaphor of travel, when we think of train travel, it's going to ask us where to and going from, but the timetable is what we're looking at with more inward processes. If you don't have a clear description of where it would take you to, none of the solutions are experienced as right because none of it kind of goes, yes, that would get me there. So you can look at lots of, that thing that people say, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. You sort of say, you could try this, you could try that. One of the reasons why people aren't getting enthusiastic is that because they're not getting that internal match of like, yes, that would get me there. In the absence of a description of there, nothing will look right. So let's imagine I said, I'm going from Brighton to somewhere in Wales. No matter how many trains listings I might look at, none of it is correct because I don't quite know where I'm going. And actually, I think students often experience this because we spend less time getting them to formulate their own desired destination. We say, come along with me. But then when we sort of say, well, what's yours? We actually haven't necessarily helped them. And it's a different kind of skill. So part of the gift potentially of this format is to support their thinking process in a different sequence. Now, I used to watch con artist movies and heist movies and all that stuff. That was for fun. But I used to get frustrated massively by the end of every story because they sort of go, here's the start point. Obviously, something challenging here. And then they tell me, and then they did this and it worked out. And I'm like, wait a minute, how did they arrive at this plan? I don't understand. And I really want it. And it was only when I got to grow and I realized that the chances are, even the criminal masterminds, but other kinds of masterminds, the idea is that they can actually suspend the question of how, put to one side the question where I'm starting from, and really zoom in. What outcome do I want? I'll reverse engineer the how. So that's the principle behind grow that I'm going to, and we're going to use it actually physically laid out in a similar way. So here's, I bring another illustration from Christian Dior, just because I happen to have a book. And he says, with great daring, I described the couture house of my dreams. And my point is, none of this is about how he was intending to make it happen. None of it. It's simply a description of the outcome. How are we doing so far? Is that, I'm just going to check in and pause here a moment in case there are already questions. Thank you. Thank you. So this distinction between the what and how is, so in fact, the kids who are kind of going, what I'm gaming for is the relief, no more pressure from the hammer. They're kind of practicing the mastermind process. So the mastermind, the sequence is, I begin with, okay, where do I want to move this situation to? What outcome do I want to see? And then from there. So this is replicated in Grow. The sequence is goal in quite a broad sense. So this isn't about setting specific, precise goals, but the fullest picture, everything that goes with this is a triumph. And R stands for reality. Now, strictly speaking, if you start asking people about the goal and where they're starting from, the brain is going to be chucking them out in a muddle. It's an unsorted list in the brain generally. And that's the first blessing of the format, because if you get people to just mentally download, this is what we're going to do. In fact, I propose there's different ways to play with it. Let me just finish articulating the other two. And then let's actually start by doing this download. Think of your frustration, everything about it first, simply in the space. So the O is the third step. O stands for obstacles and options. So we will do this sorting as a second step, and the W will come to at the end. So it's G, R, O. The W is the kind of culmination. So to begin with, let's think of, for each of you, I invite you to practice for yourself aspects of a situation that has this frustration, stuckness. It might be with your students. It's been a while. I have this group, can't seem to get them to engage, or whatever that is. So it might be not engaging, might be one item. I'm going to struggle to get this properly into these because they're small, but for you to see, I need to. Oh, thank you very much. That's lovely. So not engaging. It's been 3 months, because my brain just does that, right? It just sort of says it's been 3 months. So grades, they're preoccupied with grades. However, what you think about it, at the moment, as you can see, I'm not sorting it out. They've got some barriers. I realize that. But how do I get them past it? Okay. What else? The backward design approach. Yeah. So what I'm beginning to say, this could be run with a group of students, asking them to say, okay, you've got a project, or this could be, how does this course of study connect to your inspirations for your working life beyond? So it's very flexible in terms of, and in fact, I think this is one of the easiest ways to get, well, you might tell me otherwise. So let me see, what else? I just want them to do one, I just want them to be more active. Really, that's what I'd like. But there is an essay on the horizon. Okay. This is very much just for a demonstration. I'm inventing things. Obviously, I'm fantasizing here, and yours will likely look much more connected to something real and tangible. So looking at this, I kind of go, all right, so not engaging. So what happens really often, I get people to start to sort this, and they say, yeah, so not engaging is really high up on my agenda. I go, is this what you want to be happening in the outcome? This is the first time they actually begin to start to question this bundle of stuff that's sitting together in their brain, because in the brain they literally will be all collocated effectively. So no, okay, no, not engaging is not where I want to be moving to, but it's part of my map. It's where I'm starting from. 3 months, that's actually my frustration. It's been 3 months that I've been trying. So it's not a picture of where I want to get to. Their concern with grades, that's a barrier. So I'm putting that in the middle. Concern with grades, because that's a distraction to them. On the horizon, there is this essay coming up. On the horizon is, I want them being more active, and they've got barriers. So I've moved from, in my brain, it's all just one big pile, to having a bit more space about, well, okay, these are my frustrations. They are not necessarily a useful component of my description of what I'm working on. If I started here, I would be in problem solving. It's been 3 months, pressure's mounting. That's distracting me from where do I want to travel to, or at least it's an indication of where my back foot is. I may find some resources here, possibly. What we're going to be, so at this point, the next step would be, as they begin to paint this picture, even if there's 1 or 2 items only, you would want to prompt them to include what else needs to be here of their own definition. And it might be something unexpected, like, well, actually, now I'm switching. So this is my, as a educator, this is my wish for them. If they're making their own, what else is in the picture of this project being a full success? And I use the scaling system, as is shown on the slide. So I say, as described here, is this a 10 out of 10 versus success for you? And I would keep prompting to add more what the conditions are until this picture is, again, people tend to think of the first few, and then it's only if you pause them and ask them, how is that scoring against 10, that they start pulling out of the back of the brain other actually very relevant elements. If they're very stuck and very frustrated, what you would likely see is that they will have difficulty composing any pieces for here. They're much more likely to be able to articulate, this is driving me nuts, and I can't see past this. That's a kind of diagnostic moment that they're actually struggling to formulate a vision of a good outcome. One way to prompt it that's commonly used in the solution-focused brief therapies is the question of instead. So if somebody has at the very top of their mind, I'm stressed, and they can't get off it, the question could be, okay, suppose the stress was diminishing, what would you be experiencing instead? And sometimes you have to say it on repeat several times, because actually that's the creation of new thoughts in their brain. So that question is actually, sounds very simple. To the person themselves in the process, it's incredibly challenging, but also very conducive because you're kind of going push off of this, but generate a description of where to. And I deliberately I sometimes offer estimates. That's another game you can play, that you sort of say, so suppose you had less or no longer had this, what would it look like? What would you have instead? Would it look like you had a clear process for writing this essay, for instance? So you can offer ideas to test it, but as much as possible, I would hand it back to them so that they are active. Here we have a new game to play. This is the part of the house. We have a map, a description of where I'm starting from, where I want to get to, and then there is this mesh in the middle. And to begin with, you may see a mix of how they could go about it. So what I was saying, I could go by train. I often use travel metaphors. So I could go by train, I could row a boat, I could get help to write this essay. I could sit down with my mom. I could talk this essay through with my dog, whatever it is. The options are here. But often it's a mix between options and barriers, or it's often a story of, I've tried this, it didn't work, which means a barrier, effectively, because I know lots of options of what doesn't succeed in getting me. I think with terms of pinning picture, this has been pinned for everybody, so that might be difficult to pin my own visual. And what's more, I think that means that you probably can't. So if everybody wants to just pin whichever is most useful to them. Am I still sharing? You're also seeing my screen as well, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So, hang on a sec. Where is this going? So the great reason around emphasizing this, and this is a quote from somebody actually responding to using this, is, if you don't know what the change you want might look like, it can feel mysterious and scary. So again, one of the diagnostics, if the people here are not speaking about any options, that might mean they actually aren't connected to the outcome. So the outcome is vague at best to them, and they're not motivated. And that's, I think these in the chat, these are about getting to see well, right? The questions about the speaker. Okay, so if people here are only talking about barriers and frustrations and failures, it's possible that they need to revisit their description of success, because that's where the motivation really comes from, the willingness to make that mental effort to start constructing more. So the reminder is that they're looking for the best case outcome on their terms, in their view. So we're looking at obstacles and options. The clever move here is that any description of an obstacle can be reinterpreted as a description of a suitable solution. So let me give you an example. Every time I sit down, so I'm going to write panic. Every time I sit down to write an essay, I panic. That's a very real one. Even if you get to simply say to people, so if you could find a way, what would you have instead? So if you could have a way that at the point when you sit down to write an essay, I apologize to everybody who's in the technical, I'm using the essay slide. You had a step-by-step process, each step feeling accessible. You haven't yet devised anything. You've simply created a new description. But instead of an obstacle, it's like, okay, so the way this solution would need to look like is there would be this supported step-by-step entry into the process. Each barrier we could reframe. And this is where a bit of actual direct discussion could be useful, because this is something where people often, I think, need more specific. So up till now, you quite possibly could run this as a group activity, especially if there's shared ground on their project. So it's all discussing their project, or they're discussing it in small groups, or they're discussing their own application or aspiration for how they use it in. Here, the conversion of descriptions of barriers into a spec, effectively, a line of, so what would you need to have? This is where a bit of skill is often relevant. I'm just going to grab a bit of water. How is this landing so far? Is this making sense? Can you see an potential application? Is it making sense in your own context? Is it becoming something you can imagine using with students? And especially if yes, I'd love to hear about it. If no, thank you, Mary. I see the thumbs up. Obviously, you can also, as you can see, use it online, which is great for flexibility. How to use it in a one-on-one session. Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, I've found that it's really useful to get the person themselves to do the writing, because they are much closer to the thinking, even when they are recategorizing something, where they kind of go, no, you're right, that isn't in what I want, that is a frustration. That adjustment they take in more deeply if they're doing it themselves. So this is the bit, the reframing, where if you've had it as a group activity, this is where you might get a bit more directly involved with each one and support people with reframing. But this is often best done by examples. So I've just shown you from panic to step by step. What they would have instead of panic would be step by step. Could anyone offer me another? Yeah, would you have any kind of particularly naughty, how do I reframe a current, what appears to be an obstacle, a description of an obstacle? Because these are best demonstrated, I think. So I could start by saying, all right, they have this complete preoccupation with grades, and that's a barrier in my perception. So what would the solution need to do? Well, if I look behind this even slightly, I would say preoccupation with grades happens when people aren't confident about achieving the grades they want to aspire to. And also when they're coming for the grades, but they're not connecting this specific learning to a use they would have for it in a life, in a working life. So they're kind of disconnected from what will I take this to? Where will I use this? And they're kind of, I'm just sitting here for the grades. Right, good. I'm glad that's chiming. So, all right. So once I understand this, what's behind this? So the preoccupation with the grades, what would get them beyond it? I might say connect to their own context, to their aspirations. So so in my design, I would reframe this as a concern, they're preoccupied with grades. Instead, the solution, the how, would connect them to their aspiration. Now, I find this actually a really useful way to discuss how any course of study we can't assume that students are arriving to a course of study having really understood why they're taking that course. They may have a sort of an idea, but if the sort of an idea isn't enough to stay connected, they're likely to then sort of say, I'm here for the grades. The better we can guide them to really articulate, and again, the thing I want to reiterate, the articulation is a creative process and it's not simple or easy, which is why this is potentially useful, because this is something we can take for granted and it so often isn't happening. Down to a tiny story. I remember my son was bright, but he didn't do very well in school. And I remember sitting with his history teacher and he said, Kim seems to be bright, but he's so distracted. And I said to him, my son seems to be of the kind where he needs to know why. He needs to know why it matters. You, as a tutor, you know why history matters, right? And bless him. He had this face of like checking. Yes, I know. Is this something that gets aired, spoken of in class? The pressure of the curriculum often squeezes that thing out. But what we know from, for instance, I remember now my very first training in presentation skills, that format grid, 30% of people care about the why. And if you leave that out, the session's lost them. That was my son. History, if he doesn't understand why, everything else goes over his head because he's sitting there going, why should I want it? I'm not packing it into my basket. You're talking. I'm walking on by. So because this format is so explicit about where to, why does this matter? You know, why bother with all of this? Why be on the course? Why make this effort? Well, it's because you intend to do something with that. And the assumption can be that they already know that, but so often they don't. And I believe, I mean, after school, when my son allowed me to talk with him, this was the bit that I had to support him with. Because we teach the how, can we also teach to connect to why? Because if we ask them to be creative, but we keep saying, let me show you a how, we are short-circuiting that process for them. There was never a why. There's so many reasons for that, right? Anyone who's into history of education. So this is a kind of concise way to bring why back at any level, at the level of one assignment, at the level of, in my subject, I have this area that I don't seem to get, any kind of level. Anyone fancy giving me any more of these barriers to turn into descriptions of what a suitable solution would need to look like? Because this is the zone of obstacles, options, and opportunities. Only become relevant within this span once the span is defined. It's so boring. Time. Thank you. Wonderful. Oh, I think this has flipped. Boring. Fine. Yep, great. Okay, I'm gonna play. Let's play. And by the way, please feel free to unmute and we can talk about these. Some of these are less obvious to, and you have to kind of dig behind them a little bit to get at, well, what's a suitable distractions. Yep. Distractions. I hate the reading. Yep. Love it. This is my favorite bit.
Margarita, sorry, just
Hi.
is this area that the camera's currently pointing at, which
Yes.
is this in the problem area? Because these sound like the
It's a
problem.
bit expanding, so let me kind of move these
Yeah.
out because simply because of the size of,
Right, of the camera. Sorry, and I was just it's
yeah.
yeah. So we're talking about the
Well,
problem.
you see, there's an interesting, so I can move off to the side some of the ones that have been solved. So O is this whole area in the middle where we're exploring concerns and obstacles, options for a suitable solution,
Mm.
descriptions of solutions. So that's all O. Thank you. So boring. Boring means well, but let's kind of just a couple of seconds into that. What does boring mean? Boring can mean I don't understand why. This might be good stuff, but before, especially, and people vary. So some people are more compliant. Girls in school, I was one of those. I was a curious sponge. Tell me stuff, I'm interested. Really was. So you can imagine I had no problem in school. Um, but for some people, until they've built this frame around why this thing, why do I, because to me this is effort. So why this thing? Boring could mean they already know it, or they think they already know it, even if I agree, completely agree. Another one, I don't know why I need to know it. So with boring, it might be that at a group level, we would create several answers. And wouldn't that be a great discussion? If we were feeling daring and really like educators. Boring might mean, so boring might be a lack of why. Boring might mean that I think I know it. So, okay, if now let me think about this. So boring, if I'm treating it like this is on a student's board and they've said boring, then that prompts the question of, is it because you don't understand why this is relevant? Or is it because, so it's kind of a great starter to a conversation. But let's say they say, it's because I think I already have this covered. Okay. So any solution would be maybe it's about the excitement of new frontiers for you, even though we may think, well, once you wade in, you'll discover that that's, you didn't know. We did this last year. Okay, yes, so that's a variant of we did this last year. If the communication is I'm not seeing the spiral of the development, if we treat that as a question and then say, well, okay, let's map it. What of this is revisiting? And even if you are coming to touch the same quote unquote object, you're coming to it from a new direction. I wonder what you'll see. It's not relevant to me. I absolutely agree. So if it's not relevant to me, then it might be a different description. And that's where customizing comes in. And where having everybody doing at least a version that is theirs. Okay, boring, it's not relevant to me. We go to again this. Well, what are you intending to do with this? Could you be applying this in some way already now? Because one of the obstacles, I think, with higher education is the delay. The delay means that, well, I'll think about in 3 years' time. But that delay internally in the brain means that in the moment, I think it's boring because to keep thinking I'll maybe have a use for it in 3 years' time psychologically is disconnecting. Right? Don't understand. Yes, great. Don't understand consolidation of knowledge. I tend to, at that point, want to sort of say, let me see if I can set them up into the teach to learn cycle. Because so can you create, so then consolidation of knowledge. So if boring is, I don't understand the point of consolidation. So it might be is, okay, so what if something helps me see my mastery or demonstrate my mastery? Because consolidation of knowledge is about getting the understanding even more embedded, right? But they might not see that or see that as a desirable direction to put effort into. So to an extent, it's again a question of the why. How do I connect this? So can we create, so the description might be something that either allows you to demonstrate mastery or allows you, in which case you get gold stars and that's always fun. Or what would get you to an even greater level of mastery, because we know you might be able to sort of say, well, at an even greater level of mastery, you'd be able to do this. And see if that gets anybody's sleeves rolling up. Wonderful. I'm great. Yes. So the idea of demonstrating mastery creatively, absolutely. Somebody's mentioning overwhelm. Boring is as in. So I know I'm layering them up. I'm hoping it's possible to keep. So I'm going to stick with just filtering what I'm seeing in the chat. So taking boring as what's behind boring is overwhelm, which means there's a lot to process. Somebody was talking about earlier about a lot of information coming, and it's boring because actually if I keep catching many balls, but I can't actually slot them in, but they still keep coming, I don't get to take them in. I don't get to see what they are. I'm just chucking them down. And that eventually becomes boring. Absolutely. So if there's a Margarita quote. I've said this so many times, it's become a Margarita quote. And it's the key to this. So I'm enjoying practicing this with you. The Margarita quote, please feel free to borrow, rephrase. My phrase for it is, in every complaint, there is the seed of a wish. If there wasn't a wish, we wouldn't be complaining. Complaint is also always made of two parts. What I have now and what I wish was true. And so even when people are articulating, so that's the difference between this and this. Here is the complaint. And we are looking to find out about this gap. But always, what would you have instead is one way to evoke what is the wish. So it's boring because it's overwhelming and I can't keep up and it keeps flying at me. So what is that there? Well, what if you had command? Control, I generally is not a word I use often because control is hard to fulfill. We never get full control. 100% control is a myth. But command is to sort of say, okay, all this stuff wants to fly at me, but tell you what, I get to parse it. I have some sort of filter. This much I will let in, and then I will get to engage and do useful stuff with it and make it mine. So just as we were saying about panic, so step by step would be the wish, one version of the wish. So if it's overwhelm, then I might talk about command. So you can see that out of boring, we're kind of finding each one of them, the complaint, once we understand a bit of the nuance of the complaint, becomes a description of the wish. New frontiers, mastery, command. Somebody was talking about distract. Distract is again, actually, distract means potentially there are external factors coming in and actually disrupting me. That's what distract means. Because the word tracked is what's important here. I was on my own track, I was treading my own path. Something is pulling me off my intended path. So then you might look at, well, okay, what often people are distracted actually because they've lost connection with what their trajectory was. So one solution would be reconnect. So I often talk about reset. I currently have a mentee on public speaking, and he says, I keep losing my thought. And so we are practicing reset. So that means you take a breath, you give your brain some oxygen to actually generate your next thought. Reset. Command and clear side. So I may well have missed some things in the chat, in which case my apologies. If I have, and something's burning, please bring it up. We've actually nearly finished this process. It's really quick to say that once you have you have on your board is a collection of spec for potential solution. So every complaint has been re-articulated as the wish. Then the last stage, now there is one important thing I've forgotten to say, apologies. At the point when we are collecting option, there is no pressure to make the choice, to commit. So this is like window shopping. I could do this, I could do that. Just like when you think of travel, we could fly, we could go by train or by boat. While you're scoping out options, and one thing that can block people here is the pressure to decide what they will do. This is where the GROW format is very explicit to say, hold off on committing and making the choice. One of the phrases I used to say is, if you can only see one option, that's not a choice. You can't choose until you have several lined up. Thank you, Sandra. And so the W is explicitly, that's partly why I learned to hide it, by the way. I started out with these slides by showing the whole GROW, G-R-O-W, and people would leap into the W, and I'm like, no. So that was me taking command and saying, I will pace. The other thing that I haven't got into, but let me quickly acknowledge to you, that often you have to help people, or it's useful to help the people to subdivide, and I can't do it just don't have physically enough space. But on my slide, I'm showing you that often people, again, have an unsorted list about the ultimate reason where they want to get to and various stages along the way. So it can be an unsorted list, it just jumble. Or two things tend to happen. They can see the ultimate, I have a good job, but they can't see the steps towards it, which is another disconnect. I can see the ultimate, I need support to think the milestones. Sometimes people, you really have to drill down into it. Other times, and this goes to, by the way, I was reading about this recently, about the different levels of aspiration. So the students who have come from underprivileged backgrounds or backgrounds, they've had adverse experiences of any kind, quite often what I see in those situations is they can see the very next step, but it's really hard for them to stretch further because that's to do with the brain. It's really hard to look into where you haven't been. So this is, again, in terms of their brain work, is huge work, and it needs to be supported. So yes, there's a lot of parallels with scaffolding. Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is just a prompt within this format. People trialing it out they've learned. So sometimes I will comment to them, you need to, which are the things that you can reach fairly, which is your first step that you can reach, and how does that stay connected? Because sometimes they will go off sideways. Their ultimate destination is Y, but when they think of milestones, the milestones are kind of not actually in the trajectory. And again, it's because it's so new and it's so creative. So that can need guidance. But ultimately, the choice, the W, which way will I actually commit to do, which course of action will I adopt, that has to happen after the scoping out of options. Because people tend to rush, and it means they overlook options, the pressure acts against their brain's ability to kind of go, what else? What else? What else could I? How else have other people solved this? And so explicitly saying, putting that on hold. So that's it. At that point, yeah, that's me generally offering an ebook. So I'll just stay there. This is the full slide of Grow, which is also on the slide for this session in the festival slide. So we just have a few minutes about any, let me stop sharing perhaps and come fully into the room. So hopefully this has shown you how flexible this is, has got into some of the nuances of what you're likely to encounter. Hopefully this has illustrated to you how connected this is to people's thinking process. I appreciate the hearts and the thank yous. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else which would help you take this and apply it? Is there any snags in your mind? Did I leave anything unclear? Was there any wish that you were aware of at the start of the session that has not yet been addressed?
I think it's all been pretty clear, and I think the silence is everybody processing and thinking and reflecting. But if anybody has any questions, we've got a few minutes, and I'm sure Margarita would be delighted to have any questions just now. Yeah, Deirdre's processing everything. I think we all are.
Yeah, no, I've sat there with that same, so I totally get it. So what I'll do perhaps is quickly scan back in the chat in case there was something else that was like good stuff.
I think Sandra deserves a gold star for her contributions. She's saying she would love a gold star.
Yes, Sandra, let me put a gold star in there. Actually, everybody who has taken this in and perhaps tried it out today, if you did build any boards, I'd love to see them. If you were up for sharing, somebody has prompted me before that actually within any session, there may be people who are more comfortable to share and some others who would benefit by seeing others' examples. So that's an option, not a requirement. But in the sessions you run, that may also be something to have in your toolkit. Because as long as the person showing is comfortable.
I thought that comment about was it 30% of people need to know why? Was that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think I did my first degree was chemistry, and I would say I was quite grades focused. And I remember one group project that we did, and there was this one guy who knew everything about chemistry, was so into it, and and yet I was able, but and it became apparent. I think they had, I think his computer crashed at the end doing this group project or something. But he was quite inspirational, but he wasn't going to get the same grades as me, which was just quite interesting. But he was really interested in the why. And now, obviously, throughout my life, I've come across this sort of phenomenon of yeah, I think very often for grade focused people, they can get the grades or for a certain type of brain. But it doesn't mean that you're inspired. It doesn't mean that you actually built for that subject or you can or are actually going to achieve. And I think that's why more holistic views on education are so important. And obviously, I'm into ungraded education and building of portfolios within our time and education rather than being judged and evaluated by a tutor. But
Yes, absolutely. But again, even if they have a slight notion of what they're wanting to do, I think giving that a boost actually boosts how they fare in the study. So that connection is a one way to rebuild. We keep talking about the motivation. How do we tap into it? But also, I mean, as educators teaching specific modules, we may not be overseeing the whole process. So what I love about this is an opportunity within a relatively brief time span to prompt that conversation in, for themselves and
yeah,
hopefully also in the space. Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah, having people focus on that end solution, because I think I went through several different steps of, oh no, but why do you want that? You start off with the end goal, or I can't remember what that was called, the end goal, wasn't it? But then you think, well,
The
why do I want
desired outcome
that goal?
goal. It's
Yeah,
called
yeah,
they're calling
yeah,
it goal in this. Yeah.
goal. And then you're always stepping, and then okay, but why do I want that goal? Why do you want? Yeah, and
But do you know the thing that kids hear the most in school? Get good grades so that you'll get a good job.
Mm.
What they actually hear is important because what they often hear there is the threat. And if you don't, you'll be starving alone under the bridge. And as we know, a threat is not conducive to learning on the whole. And that was a barrier to my son. He was tremendously distracted. We were talking about distracted. That's a huge distraction. If I don't do well at university, I'm doomed.
mm,
That's massive. Now, any one student that we can get off that, and what would you have instead? You are you are putting together a picture of the future you actually want. Now we have motivation. Okay, how can this course contribute to that? So they're coming not with, we're trying to motivate them, but we're actually surfacing what they care about and what they are already motivated on. But actually, with all those threats, they get disconnected from them, some of them.
mm,
Obviously, the ones who don't, they're chugging, it's great, we just get to give them good gold stars, wonderful. But the threat is one, it's in the barrier zone. And so it's useful to be able to help them to reinterpret that and say, okay, yes, that's a risk, but what's your best case scenario? I'm finding myself having to say these you'd think are very self-evident things, but they're not. And so people are teaching me how important it is on refrain to say, no, wait a minute. We're not talking about the doom. We're talking about your best case scenario. And that's the reason why this stimulus is needed from the outside is because the doom tends to claim a lot of the brain, the problem. So we're at end. Will the meeting chat be saved? Because I'd love to just
Yes,
glance
absolutely. I
back.
can send you the meeting chat. In fact, I
Thank
can
you.
probably pop it on the Padlet so you can have a look through that later. But thank you very much, Margarita, for a wonderful session. And you've given us a really valuable tool there to think about ourselves and our students and those positive outcomes. Thank you.
Great.
thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Margie.
you. Great to meet everybody. Bye for now.
Good to
Bye.
see you.